Hello, students. Welcome to Gandhia School of Education. I'm Dr. Sonia Kaur Bansal, and today's my topic is privatization and its educational implications in subject contemporary India and education. So, students, let's understand what is privatization and how it is affecting the Indian educational system and how it is important for you all to know about it. So, let's understand. And today's my learning objective of this class would be to enable you students about the understanding of the concept of privatization as what it is and its educational implications. So, my learning outcome will only be fulfilled if you people are understanding the concept of privatization and its educational implications. So, let's understand in a better way, elaborative way, the privatization and how it is affecting the Indian education system. So, let's start it. Now, first of all, we are going to discuss about education, privatization of education and its background. We are just looking at the introduction, sort of, and just understand it in that way that education is the most important and powerful tool invented by mankind to shape and mold himself for personal as well as social life. So, without education, we cannot think of our existence on this earth. So, education is very important, and education actually prepares a person for life. Moreover, it is important source of employment also. Once you get the education and once you are skillful in a particular field of area, then your employment is also for sure, and income and standard of living as well. So everyone gives importance to higher education, and as a result it has become one of the basic necessities of human life in the materialistic and knowledgeable society. Hence, the demand for higher education has increased, especially after the independence of India. So, but the central and the state government are unable to meet the increasing the demand for higher education, and the reasons may vary due to financial constraints, non-availability of appropriate places, and cost of higher education. So therefore, students, it also encourages in another way the individuals and organization to establish own colleges and deemed universities. So we have a main objective after independence that we have to educate our people of India in a very good number. We wanted to achieve the literacy rate in a high number, but it is not possible for government also due to maybe financial crisis or non-availability of the appropriate resources. So public was more interested, and they were opening some colleges and universities also for the sake of giving good education to those who are not getting education from government sector. So, as a result, the number of self financed arts and science, engineering, and medical colleges has increased on the one hand and increased the gap between the demand and supply of higher education. This is also because the afflicted colleges have applied for additional seats to meet the demand for certain courses. Thus, the increase in the number of colleges and demand for additional seats create a gap between the demand and supply of higher education in many higher educational institutions of India. Further, privatization has positive and negative impact also on higher education as well as on society. So, we are going to look at all these factors today in a very elaborative manner. So, privatization of formal education in India is not new, students. First of all, understand this thing. It existed before, even before independence, in the form of so-called public schools, Doon schools, Mayo College, and Christian missionary schools and colleges. Central and state government both took initiatives to establish state-owned or government-aided schools. Then after 1990s, interlinked processes of globalization and liberalization have tremendously affected the education process in India. Now, it was the time when Vasudev Kutumbakam thought was there and globalization was increasing in every sphere of life. And liberalization made the people think so to interlink the higher education system with other part of the world also. So these have encouraged many forms of privatization and aided schools through the processes like rise in private tuition, subcontracting the publication of textbooks to private agencies, selection and appointment of teachers by their own management boards of their own system. So this is how privatization's concept was coming very clearer way. Now, let's understand what is privatization. The term is itself clear, private. That is coming from privatization. Privatization occurs when a government-owned business or institution, operation, or property becomes owned by a private non-government party. So understand that we are having two aspects. One is government, which is whole and soul is looked after by the government and the whole and soul responsibilities of the government. And another thing is private. And private, there is less restrictions, or we can call interference from the government sector, but we have to definitely follow the particular rules of being in existence. So, but it is owned by some private people or private group or person. So it is a non-government party. Now, privatization also describes the transition of a company from being publicly traded to becoming privately held. This is referred to as corporate privatization. So this is about privatization. That privatization means least interference of government and its norms, and there is no like something, it is not being owned by government, it is owned by private people. Now, concept of privatization, let's look in detail. In the Indian education system, apart from the government aided institutes, there are a large number of private institutes that have become into existence over a period of time. Privatization has been made both at secondary and higher secondary level. And the concept of privatization in educational institutions means the running of institutes or a particular school, college, without taking any financial subsidy from the government. They are handling their funds by their own. So, however, they are required to take recognition from the concerned authority of the government, but rest of the management and administration part is done by their own. So, these schools are run by private societies or trust or individuals, but they are affiliated to a particular board established by maybe state government or central government, so or maybe Indian Certificate of Secondary Education, CBSC, RBSC, ICSC, or to the another state boards. So this is something we have talked about, privatization of schools, how it came into existence. Now, students, privatization of public education, how it is in detail we are going to discuss. So let's see that turning the operation of public schools over to private companies is a controversial idea. Based on the less controversial notion that part of what makes improving public schools so hard is that they are bogged down in bureaucratic mire. So, private efforts to run public schools, launched with great fanfare, risk losing a lot of steam once they get down to the dirty work of running schools. But despite private contractors' problem, the emergence of education as an industry continues. So, privatization of public education is somehow not very easy. It is somewhat difficult also, and it takes some time and great fanfare also. So, decisions favoring privatization in education. So, there were many policies which were made time to time, like National Policy of Education, which came into existence in 1986. And then 8th 5-year plan came into existence in 1992, 1997. And then UGC regulations 1995, the World Bank 1995, and Supreme Court judgment which came in 2002. These all favor the privatization of education in India, because the aim was to generate more and more resources for the people to become literate. Somehow it has come a long way, and now the whatever the shortcomings are here prevailing, and now today's challenges are also here. We cannot ignore them, but these were some decisions who were favoring privatization of in education in India. Now, inability of the state. Now, this is how the state expressed their inability, poor access, first of all. So, 7% of youth age group 16 to 24 have access to higher education. They studied in schools, primary schools and pre-primary schools and secondary schools. But when they were supposed to go to the higher education, it was not easily accessible to them, and it has to be need to be raised at least 10%. So only 7% of youth have access. This is a very big challenge for India. Non-placement. 25 to 30% of the students who pass class 12 do not find placement in higher education. Maybe the reasons that the educational institutions are far away from their places where they live, and that's why they get poor access. And when they are not being placed by the educational institutes, so it is really very expressing inability of the state. Then low priority in the state. In the first to fifth year plan, allocation to education was 7.6%. It came down to 1.3% in eighth plan. So this is how the state expressed their inabilities, and how the privatization became a mandatory thing, or we can call a side-by-side assistance to government's institutions. So now, factors responsible for privatization. Why the privatization was so important, and why the government was paying so much attention for it. Why the authorities were recognizing it so fast. So there were many reasons, many responsible factors which we have to look upon. So first of all, let's look at that need for competitive efficiency. So main justification for privatization rests heavily on the grounds of efficiency to promote a more competitive economic environment. Operations of public sector's enterprise is considered inefficient. So whatever was being done in public sector or government sector, it was not sufficient. So competitive efficiency was needed. It is believed that private ownership and control are more efficient in terms of resource allocation and work. When it was only with government resources, that no ownership was there, where the people were just employed and they think that they are working only. But in private sectors where the funds are managed by themselves and where they think that their whole and soul benefit will also be theirs, so in that case, their competitive efficiency increases. That's why they charge, and they claim for that we charge for facilities which they are providing. So that's why there was a need for competitive efficiency, that one group of people who were not very much interested in getting education from the government sector, because there were not so much facilities there, and far away from their own places. So this was all actually making responsible for the privatization of education. Secondly, growth in population. So India has a population of nearly 135 crores. So in order to provide a large number of people, more private institutions are needed. Government institutions approach is not to each and every street of India. So it was felt that this task cannot be alone done by government sector only. So privatization came into need, and that's why, to fulfill the demand of higher education of young people in the country, privatization of higher education was needed, and it was followed religiously. So these were the factors which were actually responsible. So firstly, we discussed about need for competitive efficiency, which was really needed in that time. And then secondly, growth in population is actually encouraging the private institutions to grow more and more, because they are availing the resources to very nearby places of the public. Then thirdly, financial burden on government. So how it was creating financial government burden on government. Higher education in India is in financial stress. The state, the government can no longer bear the financial burden of the public enterprises. So current spending on the education in India is not more than 3.5 of GDP. Very little is being spent on higher education. Therefore, there is a need to evolve policy through which private resources are also mobilized. So, just to reduce the burden on government, private resources were encouraged because we had to achieve the objective of privatization, because more and more people had to be literate. So financial burden has to be seen, and government took it in that way that people were more and more actually involving themselves. So this was the cause. This was the responsible factor which lead to more and more privatization. Now, fourth point is related to quest of quality. Yes, of course, we are talking about quality. So, private institutions do not require long procedures for procurement of human as well as material resource. Once you go there in private institutions, and you just submit the fee and you get the admission there. But in order to maintain good qualitative infrastructure and equipments like furniture, building, So there was a need that private institutions do not require long procedures for procurement of human as well as material resource. So in order to maintain those things, it was really necessary to maintain the privatization. So in that case, it was really necessary. All right, students. So just understand that it was a financial burden on government, and then it was a quest for quality. Now let's understand further about it. So rapid growth of school education. So growing number of schools naturally push the demand of higher education, which the 204 government is not able to provide. Therefore, the demand for privatization of higher education is need of the hour. So fulfilling the need for skilled manpower. This was another factor responsible for privatization. So there is a very little initiative from public sector due to limited freedom. So private institutions are free to initiate modern and advanced course in order to fulfill the demand of the subjects. For this it is needed. So these were the factors which were really responsible for privatization. Now let's have a look on the advantages of privatization of education, students. Similarly, there are many things that privatization has contributed positively to our society, which includes following, like accessible education. So now we discussed about that it was impossible sort of work for government to give education to all the corners. So there was a need felt that some of the good people of country come forward and establish their own institutions. And there was a need because accessible education was the need of the hour. So there is a massive increase in the number of schools and educational institutions across the country. So education is now easily accessible to those who can afford to pay the school fees. Then nextly, improved infrastructures. Undoubtedly, private sector has made remarkable infrastructure changes and has replenished a state of art framework. We can visit a very good private school and we can visit a government school. Still, after so many years of independence, we can see a very noteworthy difference between them. As far as concerned with the infrastructure is highly rated in private institutions, and people need such type of institutions, infrastructures where they are focusing more on their quality education. So these are some advantages of privatization of education, that it is accessible to all people, all those who aspire to take the higher education. And education is now accessible to those who can afford to pay school fees or college fee in as it is demanded by private institutions. Then it comes to the terms of advanced teaching. So they have introduced modern techniques of teaching. Yes, now it is the time of technical advancement, technical revolution, and even nowadays we are talking about it, that advancement is definitely there. So when we are talking about this advancement, so this advancement is really working. And this is something that we are not actually asking that. So somehow students, so advanced teaching, they have introduced modern techniques of teaching which helps children to better learning and increase their performance also. So this is the way how they are getting more and more out of it, and it is helping children also in better learning and increase their performances. So various modern educational technologies include tabs and other gadgets, class flows, smart classrooms, Google Meet classes as we are doing. So, etc. Advanced techniques are being used by the private institutions, and they are doing wonderful work in that. So, these are really noteworthy advantages of a privatization on education. Now, let's understand about liberty to choose institution. Increase in number of schools and colleges have provided parents with a variety of options to choose from. So this is how, when parents are having so many options, so in that case they are having access to good quality education, and they can take the admission of their ward to get admitted in any of their choice which they find suitable for them. Then now come to the advantages. Another advantages we are discussing, that is related to extra curricular activities. So every private school nowadays comes up with new and interesting activity ideas that help a child to learn new things and become active in all aspects. So this is the need of the time, where the parents as well as children, they are looking for a place where their extracurricular activities are high in number and they are taking care of it. So this is how their interests are working with them. So this is how the institutions are also paying attention more and more on them. Now next is about disadvantages of privatization of education. Definitely, we are looking more and more about advantages, and there are so many advantages of privatization in education. And so I told you about that. Now let's have a look on disadvantages also, but because anything which is being used by us, which is used by the people, it not only comes with advantages but also disadvantages, and we cannot ignore them. So, despite of many constructive contributions, there are many facets that have doomed our reaction, doomed our education sector. So, let's have a point about it, like disparity in public and private schools. So, private schools has raised the bars of their school standards too high that government schools are unable to match up their benchmarks. A normal layman wants to get admitted their ward in private school instead of government schools, because they have set a benchmark for the people. But as far as we are looking at their standards, they are too high, and it is not easily acceptable by all the people. Then secondly, most important thing which we cannot ignore at all, that is modern schools have set their school fees upscale, that it is difficult for parents with merged income to bear those with and thus restrict their child's admission to such schools. Private schools are undoubtedly, they are charging for their facilities, their infrastructure, they are really paying high for that. But in that case, it is becoming too pricey, and students are actually willing, those who are brilliant, they are extra intelligent, superbly intelligent, they want to study there. But in that case, if they want to study, they are actually not able to get admission due to high prices in the fees. So no option is left to them. They have to go to the government schools where the infrastructure is less, the facilities are less, or maybe the staff's quality is also less. And then third most important disadvantage of privatization of education is related to more of a business. Yes, it has been converted into a business rather than a schooling quality education system. So the focus of private schools or colleges or university has shifted from providing education to earning money. So it has become now a business for those who are opening it, who are accessing it. So this can be very well clarified from the higher donation demanded from admission of even a bright child. by such institutions apart from a pricey free structure. We can see long queues in front of a primary well known school, branded school, where parents are standing in a queue and they are ready to pay the donations to get their ward admitted in that particular school. So this is how it has become more of a business now. All right, students. Now next is discrimination. In order to maintain a standard, these institutions strictly avoid admission of people from poor families. And for this, RTE also came into existence. And this type of order to maintain standard, these institutions strictly avoid admission of people from poor families, which is obvious from their high prices. And thus, such children are deterred from procuring education from private schools of such standards. So, lack of trained teachers. This is another thing which I'm going to explain you. So, lack of trained teacher is also one of the most important thing, which is actually being in concern. So, trained teachers are required, and it is very necessary to get them trained after B.Ed training. So, just taking care that quality of education is a complex issue and is difficult to measure. And it has not been certain of any specific method that can provide quality education. So this is how it is working, students. So some schools are able to provide the standardized education due to lack of trained teachers. They are unable to provide the quality. So this is how the it is working in the privatization sector. They are unable to provide the quality education on the uninterrupted basis. So how it is working? We have seen discrimination and lack of trained teachers. Now we have come to the conclusion, and in conclusion part, we can say through privatization have made considerable contributions and alternatives in education sector, but it does not uplift the burden of public schools and also do not comply with human right regulations. So it is observed that it has been intensified the sector by introducing complex infrastructure and modern technique of teaching. It has raised a need to monitor the schools on the basis of equality, monetary demands, and to maintain human rights regime. So we can say, students, that there is something that we need for privatization. And privatization can help India to gain higher competitive advantages in education sector. So when it is not alone possible with government's programs, schemes, policies, which are introduced time to time for the general people, and it is not actually accessible for all the people, then there comes a need when people are actually finding it more and more convenient. So privatization can help India to gain higher competitive advantages in education sector. There can be some manipulations, but can be managed by proper rules and regulations by the government. So there are always pros and cons that can be overcome by involving government and private sector effectively. So we can never say that we are actually happy when it is about private sector or government sector. So we have to just look at that. And I have told you many things related to privatization in public education. So once again, just to brief that, I'm explaining you that in the Indian education system, apart from the government aided institutes, there are large number of private institutes. Why there was a need? Because it was felt that it was not alone government's task. So, a large number of private institutes that have come into existence over a period of time, and it has really made privatization has really made both at secondary and higher secondary level. So, the concept of privatization in educational institutions means running the institute without taking financial subsidy from the government. And however, they are required to take recognition definitely, and it has to be recognized either from RBSC, CBSC, or ICSC, which I have told you in my earlier slides that it has to be definitely given. So once any institution is authorized by the government governing agency, it is actually becoming privatization of public education. So, turning the operation of public education over to private companies is a controversial idea based on the less controversial notion that part of what makes improving public schools so hard is that they are bogged down in a bureaucratic time. So, private efforts to run public schools launched with great fanfare and risk of losing a lot of steam once they get down to the dirty work of running schools, as it has become a business for them. But despite private contractors' problem, the emergence of education as an industry continues. So this is how it is working, students. So there were, then we discussed about, there were many decisions of who favored the privatization of education, and mainly we discussed about national policy of education in 1986, and then eighth five-year plan, which came into existence from 1992 to 1997. It also favored the privatization of education to access to make the education accessible for maximum people. Then UGC regulations, which came in 1995, it also favored privatization of education, and it really favored in it in a very good way. Then the World Bank in 1995, it also favored the privatization. Then Supreme Court judgment in 2002, it also favored the privatization in a very good number. So this is how it was working with other people also. So this is the actually expressing the state's inability. So when we are talking about state's inability, so it was really working in that way that it was more and more. So how it was working and how it was actually giving more opportunities to that. So privatization is something that can help India to gain better, higher competition advantages in education sector. So this is how it was working. Inability of the state actually led the institutions to make it private. So poor access, non-replacement, and low priority were some of the reasons we discussed. And then we discussed about some responsible factors for privatization. And in that we saw about need for competitive efficiency, and it led to main justification for privatization rest heavily on the ground of efficiency to promote a more competitive economic environment. Operations of public sector enterprises is considered inefficient in that way. So it is believed that private ownership and control are more efficient in terms of resource allocation and work. And then we saw about growth in population, how it is actually heavily growing, and the resources were limited. And to fulfill the demand of for higher education of young people in the country, privatization of higher education is needed. So financial burden on government was there. So higher education in India is in financial stress. So when it came in financial stress, so it is the state government can no longer bear the financial burden of the public enterprises. So this is how it was working. So current spending on the education in India is not more than 3.5% of GDP. So it is how very little is being spent on higher education. So, therefore, quest for quality, private institutions do not require or do not actually long procedures for procuring human as well as material resources. So, in order to maintain good qualitative infrastructure and equipments like furniture, buildings, different types of laboratories or playgrounds, water facilities, toilet facilities, so many infrastructures related facilities which are found very good in private sector. So these were actually the responsible factors which led to the privatization of schooling, of colleges and universities. And there came a time where there was a rapid growth of school education students. So, growing number of schools naturally pushed the demand of higher education, which the 2004 government is not able to provide. Therefore, the demand for privatization of our higher education is need of the hour. So, fulfilling the need for skilled manpower, it was another important point. All right, so let's take care of all these points and just think in that way that it is very important for them. Then there can be some manipulations but can be managed by proper rules and regulations by the government. And there are always pros and cons to students that can be overcome by involving the government and private sector effectively. So in conclusion we can say that both the sectors are needed, either it is government or private, both are needed in an effective way. All right, then there are some references students for your purpose, and you can study more about it for your well understanding. Now let's have some MCQs related to privatization and some general concepts that you must understand. So, question number one is related to privatization of the public sector undertaking by selling off parts of the equity of PSUs to the private sector is known as privatization, origin of private sector, disinvestment, none of the above. So, the correct answer is here privatization. All right. So, the second question is related to which of the following is the aim of privatization? Option A, providing a strong momentum to the inflow of FDI, improving the efficiency of PSUs, both A and B, none of the above. So the correct answer is both A and B. We are providing a strong momentum to the inflow of FDI and improving the efficiency of PSUs. Then means the question 3 is related to dash means the transfer of ownership, management and control of public sector enterprises to the private sector. So liberalization, is it privatization, is it globalization or none of the above? So the correct answer, yes of course, it is privatization. Then question fourth is about dash is not constitutional value. Fraternity, justice, and freedom. None of these is the correct answer. So in survey, emphasis is given on a situation, present, past, or future, or measurement. So present situation is given more emphasis. Then sixth question is related to means lessing the government restriction on various levels. So it is calling globalization, liberalization, privatization, or industrialization. So it means privatization. So I hope you have understood well, students, and I hope you will revise the concept of privatization, and you have understood it in a very good way. We have seen what is privatization, what is privatization in education, and how it is leading a demand in present situation, and how privatization is useful and how it is working for us. So it is all about it. Understood, students? So it's all about it. Okay. I hope you have understood it. So see you in the next class. Till then, stay safe and stay healthy.